I was 58 years old when my husband looked me in the eyes and told me that 30 years of marriage weren't enough to keep him from walking away. He chose a woman who was younger than our oldest daughter, and he expected me to simply accept it. What he never imagined was that 30 years later, fate would bring us face to face again, and this time, I would be the one holding all the cards. My name is Margaret Collins, and I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. By the time this story truly began, I had already spent nearly 3 decades believing I had built the kind of marriage people admired. My husband, Richard, and I had met in college at the Ohio State University. He was charming, ambitious, and made me laugh even during the hardest semesters. We married when I was 26, bought a modest home in a quiet suburb of Columbus, and raised 2 wonderful children together. For years, I believed we were partners in every sense of the word. While Richard climbed the corporate ladder at a manufacturing company, I worked part-time as a librarian before eventually staying home to care for our children and my aging mother. I sacrificed promotions, dreams, and countless opportunities because I believed family came first. Richard always thanked me, or at least I thought he did. As the years passed, something began to change. He started staying late at work more often. Weekend business trips suddenly became common. His phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter, never left his pocket. Every question I asked was answered with irritation instead of reassurance. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't exciting anymore. Maybe turning 58 had made me invisible. Maybe the gray strands in my hair reminded him that time never stops for anyone. I joined a fitness class, bought new clothes, even surprised him with reservations at the same downtown restaurant where he'd proposed decades earlier. He smiled politely that night, but his eyes looked as though they belonged somewhere else. Then came the afternoon that shattered everything. Richard walked into our living room carrying a small leather suitcase I'd never seen before. His expression wasn't guilty. It wasn't even sad. It was calm, as if he'd rehearsed every word during those long business trips. "I've met someone else," he said. The room became unbearably quiet. I remember staring at the wedding photo hanging above the fireplace, wondering how a lifetime of memories could suddenly feel like they belonged to strangers. I had no idea that the worst part of his. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. I just stared at Richard, hoping he would laugh, tell me it was some terrible joke, or admit he was confused. Instead, he quietly set the suitcase beside the front door, folded his arms, and looked at me with a coldness I had never seen in 30 years of marriage. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said, "but I deserve to be happy." Those words cut deeper than anything else he could have said. "And what about our happiness?" I whispered. "What about everything we've built together?" He looked away. "Things have changed." I asked the question I was terrified to hear answered. "Who is she?" There was a long silence before he finally replied. "Her name is Lauren. She's 29. 29. She was younger than our daughter, Emily." The number echoed in my mind until I felt physically sick. I couldn't understand how the man who had celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, graduations, and family vacations with me could suddenly throw it all away for someone half his age. The next few days were a blur. Richard moved into a luxury apartment in Chicago, Illinois, where Lauren had accepted a marketing job. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply left, carrying only a few boxes and the confidence of a man convinced he'd found a better future. Our children were devastated. Emily stopped speaking to her father for months. Our son, Daniel, tried to stay neutral, but I could see the disappointment every time Richard called with another excuse for missing birthdays or holidays. Friends whispered behind my back. Some pitied me. Others assumed I must have done something wrong. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you question your own worth. The divorce was finalized less than a year later. I kept our home in Columbus, but financially, life became difficult. After years away from full-time work, I had to rebuild from the beginning. At 59, I accepted a position at the local public library. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me purpose. Slowly, I rediscovered pieces of the woman I had forgotten while living in someone else's shadow. I learned to travel with friends. I took painting classes. I volunteered at community literacy programs. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on what I wanted. Meanwhile, news about Richard occasionally reached me through mutual friends. He and Lauren appeared happy in photographs from Naples, Florida, ski trips in Aspen, Colorado, and expensive charity galas. Whenever I saw those pictures, I wondered if I'd simply been the first chapter in a story he no longer cared to remember. So I stopped looking. I closed that chapter of my life and promised myself I would never let his choices define my future. I believed I would never see Richard Collins again. I was wrong. 30 years later, a single unexpected encounter would change everything. 30 years passed faster than I ever imagined. I was 88 years old when fate decided my story with Richard Collins wasn't quite finished. By then, my life looked nothing like the lonely future I had feared after the divorce. I had retired from the library, published a small collection of local history essays, and spent my days surrounded by close friends. My children and 4 wonderful grandchildren. My little house in Columbus, Ohio, had become the heart of every family gathering. The pain Richard left behind had faded into a distant memory, not because I forgot it, but because I refused to let it define me. One crisp autumn afternoon, I drove to Cleveland, Ohio, to attend a charity fundraiser supporting senior literacy programs. After the event ended, I stopped at a quiet cafe before beginning the drive home. That's when I saw him. Richard. At first, I barely recognized him. The confident executive who had once walked away without looking back was gone. His shoulders were bent, his expensive suits had been replaced by worn-out clothes, and his face carried the weight of years that money couldn't erase. He looked up, and our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he slowly walked toward my table. "Margaret?" he asked softly. I nodded. "It's been a long time." He gave a weak smile. 30 years. He asked if he could sit down. Part of me wanted to leave without saying a word. 30 years earlier, he hadn't given me the dignity of a real goodbye. But another part of me, the woman who had spent decades healing, felt no anger anymore. I simply said, "Go ahead." For the next hour, Richard told me a story I never expected to hear. Lauren had left him years earlier for someone even younger. The fortune he had once been so proud of disappeared after several failed business investments. Most of the friends who had surrounded him during his successful years had vanished when the money did. Our children stayed polite with him, but the closeness he had thrown away could never be rebuilt. Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I spent years thinking I was chasing a better life," he whispered. "Instead, I walked away from the best thing that ever happened to me." For the first time in decades, Richard apologized. A real apology. Not an excuse. Not a justification. Just regret. I listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. "I forgave you years ago, Richard," I said. "Not because you deserved it, but because I deserved peace." His eyes filled with tears as he lowered his head. I stood, wished him well, and walked out of the cafe into the cool Ohio air. That day, I didn't feel like the woman who had been abandoned. I felt like the woman who had survived.